start, everyone. So I'm just going to introduce Savvy Sarah, who is going to be leading the webinar tonight, and she's going to be talking to us all about money. So without further ado, I will hand over to Sarah. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Helen. Right, hi everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining this webinar. Let's talk about money. The thing that nobody seems to want to talk about. Yeah, I'd just like to say, well, since I started with the collective, this is the subject that I think has come up more often than any other subject. So hopefully I'll share some interesting thoughts with you today. Those of you that have seen me talk at all about my Savvy Conversations framework, some of it will be a little bit familiar to you. But we're going to go on to, once I've just talked about the framework and how you might use that to have some of your pricing and money conversations, I'm going to go on and share some top tips as well. So hopefully the two together will be useful for you. So let's get started then. So, oh, I can't do my, sorry, a bit of a technical problem. Do I use that one? There you go. How did I do it with that? Sorry, we've changed computers, so I'll just
can use that.
Oh, okay, marvellous. So here's a little quote for you. I like this one, and it's a bit provocative, but by Richard Branson, of course. You know, try to avoid falling out with people, because the world's a very small place. And I think actually in relation to this topic, that's quite a good one to start, really, because I think that's why a lot of people don't like to talk about money, because they're worried about falling out with people. So what I'm hoping to share with you today is a way to talk about money and not fall out with people. So my mission really is to help you have these conversations brilliantly more of the time. And as you know, Savvy Conversations are my focus. So let's just outline what the few things are that we're going to cover today. First of all, it's about how to talk about money without upsetting your customers, whoever they may be, which I think is what you really wanted to do. In particular, we're going to have a look at, and I'm going to share some tips on how to negotiate prices, how to deal with those slow payers, so those of you who don't do the point of sale payments, how you actually get people to pay invoices on time and that sort of thing. And actually how, if you do all of that and it's still not working, how and in fact why you should fire your bad customers. Which I thought you might find quite interesting too. So all of that is about then getting the balance right so that you can get well paid for what you do, you get paid on time, and at the same time you're building obviously those good customer relationships. So let's get into it. So some of you will have seen my lovely little Savvy Conversations triangle before, and I'm going to start with that because I think that is actually the cornerstone, if you like, of where we start with having these candid, open conversations. So the right conversation, we want to make sure that we're having the right conversation, we're having it in the right way, and we're having it at the right time. So some of you might be thinking, well, okay, I think I know what the right conversation is, but maybe I don't know the right way to have it. Or I know what the right conversation is, but when's the right time for me to have this conversation about money with my customers? So the point being that we really need to do all three things. The right conversation, are we raising the right things in, and we're doing it in the right way, and we're doing it at the right time. So we'll come back to that probably throughout, and actually certainly at the end of this, so that you can see how that will tie everything in together. And the reason why we want to do that is, on the one side, if you think about this as a seesaw, as I do, so if you think on the one side of the seesaw, what you're trying to do, if you're having any discussion, but particularly if we're thinking this at the moment about pricing or money, on the one side, you're trying to get the result. So you're trying to have the discussion about how much you want to be paid, or when you want to be paid, or whatever the other, you know, issues might be. So you really want to try and get that result. On the other side of the seesaw, at the same time, you're wanting to maintain good relationships with people. So you're wanting to make sure that actually you're getting your message across, but you're doing it in a way that everybody is happy with. And so what we tend to do is we have that seesaw and we go backwards and forwards, really, and bounce from one side to the other. And either, when sometimes we make a few mistakes, we might think we've got so fed up with somebody about not paying on time that we're going to have a really honest conversation with them now. We maybe let our emotions take over, get a bit angry about it, and so we're just focused on the get results side of the seesaw. And in that moment of having that conversation, then it means that we forget how we also need to maintain relationships, and that's when people obviously fall out. On the other hand, and I think from the conversations I've had with many of you, I think this is more so the issue, is when it comes to pricing, I think what a lot of us tend to do is we are so concerned about maintaining the relationship and keeping our customers happy and on track that actually we don't get the results we want. We avoid having the conversation that we know that we should be having, or we have it in such a way that doesn't get the result that we're after. So what we want to try and do is get to that middle ground so that the seesaw is sitting as near as possible in the middle of that triangle, and it's just moving very gently like that, rather than going from one side to the other and bouncing up and down on the seesaw. So as we go through the examples, perhaps you'd like to sort of keep thinking about that and think, well, where do you sit on what do you tend to do in terms of getting the results and maintaining those relationships? So it's not what you do, it's the way that you do it, isn't it? So I just thought I'd share this is a common communication model that gets quoted but actually gets misquoted quite a lot. So I just want to get this in our minds. Probably you already have heard this before. 7% of the feelings and attitudes that we communicate is communicated through what we actually say. It's not necessarily communicated by what we're saying. And then it's 38% is in the way that we say it. So remember the triangle, right conversation, in the right way at the right time. So in the right way, the way that we say it is 38% of the feelings and attitudes are coming across in that way. Maybe that's not very surprising. I think the final figure is one that we really do need to think about. And that is that 55% of our meaning is in our facial expression. So just have a think about that. When you have a difficult conversation to have with your clients, particularly around pricing, how often do you think, oh, I'll send an email instead? And I'm not saying that's wrong, and I have done that myself. But if you decide to send an email, then actually you're losing potentially 55% of the meaning of what you're trying to get across, because that can't be got across in an email. So it's really worth being brave and thinking about, would this conversation go better actually if we had a face-to-face meeting about it? There's all sorts of reasons why you might not want to do that, but I think it's worth just bearing that in mind. So let me share with you the model which I have been researching over the last 5 or so years, and which I'm just writing about at the moment in my book. What I found is that there are 5 things, and I call them cogs. So there are 5 cogs that need to be present for you to make sure that you get the result you want from any discussions that you have, but particularly if we're thinking about pricing and money. If you need to get the result, but you also need to maintain the relationship, then there are 5 things that need to be present. And your job is to make sure that you adjust your approach when you're having the conversation, so that you're turning the volume of each of those cogs up and down according to the relationship that you've got with your client, how difficult or how friendly perhaps they are, how long you've had them as a client, what exactly the situation is that you need to be discussing. And that's your situational judgment. So you need to actually think about each of those 5 things and think, how might I be able to adjust my approach to get a better result and maintain those relationships? So let me just reveal to you what the 5 cogs stand for. This is the one that I think, in terms of talking about money, that people have the most potential issue with, and that's about being candid. So it's about how willing are you to be really truthful, be really honest about the pricing situation or money situation, and actually front that up with your customers. I think definitely that's the feedback that I've had from lots of different people, is that that's the bit really that we tend to find most difficult. So if we go back to our cogs, we've got to really think about what's the volume of that cog when it comes to the conversation that you're having. And I'll say a bit more about that when I've revealed all of the whole model. So how candid are you willing and able to be? And then, of course, if you were just candid and you weren't respectful, then that would cause a problem as well, wouldn't it? Because people would potentially think you were being a bit blunt or a bit rude. And so you want to make sure that you're obviously delivering your message in a very respectful way, and it's polite and it's kind and it's considerate. The third cog is about engaging. And again, I think this is one that certainly in my coaching, I need to focus on quite a lot with clients, because actually, although we might think that we're being engaging, often we've just stored up an issue like the price, the pricing, the money situation has been kind of, we've been mulling it over for ages, and actually we don't really want to engage in a discussion. We want to, that's Helen getting involved, by the way. I'll carry on.
I was just trying to see if anyone else was coming into the meeting.
I'll carry on. We're going to be engaging in the conversation with them, and that's actually takes quite a bit of takes you being a bit brave, doesn't it? Because actually, you've just got your message that you want to get across, and that's very often why we want to just send an email instead of have an engaging conversation about it. But actually, all the evidence suggests that if we can engage people in that discussion, involve them inclusively in it, then we're far more likely to get this result that we want and maintain the good relationship. So I'd encourage you to think about that if that's something that you usually shy away from. The D cog is about being directional. So that's making sure that you've got in mind what you're trying to achieve from that conversation, that you actually achieve what you wanted to get out of it. So it's about keeping that in mind, making sure that's driving you, and making sure that you don't get sidetracked onto different things. So we're being candid, we're being respectful, we're being engaging, we're being directional, and then we're doing all of that with some sensitivity. So that sensitivity is at different levels. It's about being sensitive in the conversation. So have they just reacted really angrily? Have they got quite upset? Have they turned off and decided they don't want to talk about it? So it's making sure that we're sensitive to those things that are going on. And being able to respond appropriately to people's feelings and behaviour, and also being sensitive to, is this the right time for them to have that conversation? So are they dealing with too many other things? Are they really listening to you? Have you picked your right time? Because actually, if you don't pick the right time, it doesn't matter how well you have the conversation. If they're not listening, because they've got too many other things going on, then you're wasting your time and effort, really. So let me just put the next slide up, because this, I think, and I'll just talk around this as you look at the slide. So if you think of each of those 5 key areas being present in your conversations about money, and they're all going round in the conversation to make the conversation a success. So what you need to be thinking about is, should I make my candid cog bigger? Am I actually being a little bit shy and retiring? You know, am I kind of trying to hint that there's an issue, or am I saying it as it is? Yeah, maybe if that's the case, we need to think about increasing the size of the candid cog, or the volume of the candid cog. And maybe we're being, I don't know, oversensitive. So maybe we're thinking, oh, if we raise this issue, they're going to fall out with me and they're never going to come back, and they'll stop being a customer. In which case, maybe you need to think about the level of your sensitivity and maybe turn it down a little bit. The issue is, and this is again where we all make mistakes, is that in turning it down, we turn it off. And the point is, we don't turn it off, we just turn it down. So each of those 5 cogs must be there in the conversation if you're going to get that seesaw right, that balance of the get results on the one side, excuse me, and maintain the relationships on the other. So you'll probably will have already noticed that the candid and the directional cogs very much are on the get results side of the seesaw, and the respectful and the sensitive cogs are on the maintain relationship side of the seesaw. And the engaging is kind of in the middle, really. It does a bit of both, because it's helping you get the results because you're engaging people in the problem and also then engaging them in the solution. So just have a think about that, and think about where your natural kind of default position lies. Most of us have got a position that we're comfortable with, or your comfort zone. You'll be more candid and directional, or you'll be more worried about maintaining relationships, so you'll be more on the other side. So just think about where you might just slightly change the balance in order to get a bit of a better result for yourself. So wanted to share that with you. I know some of you will have seen it before, but it's hopefully a useful reminder. And that then positions us into, okay, then, so what's the content of some of these conversations that we perhaps need to be having? So a bit more of the sort of strategy around pricing. So don't forget that, but we'll move on from that, and we'll have a look at some tips. And you may have some other tips which you want to share with me too, because I also have all of these issues myself with my clients. So here's some tips for, first of all, negotiating on prices. So the first one is about ask. So make sure that you're, rather than just going to tell people what the position is, the best tip really is to ask lots of questions and to properly listen to the answers. Because actually, do you really know what your customers' true priorities are? They may raise the issue about pricing, but actually it may be that if you had a good, engaging conversation with them, you'd find that pricing is not really the issue at all. It's something entirely different. It might be about quality, it might be about quantity, it might be about all sorts of other things. So that's the first tip, is to ask lots of questions and to listen to what's really important to the customers before you go into any negotiation at all around the price. Second tip is about avoiding negotiating on price alone. And I think we all probably fall into that trap sometimes, particularly if somebody else has raised the issue of price and said you're too expensive or whatever it is. Then immediately we focus in on that. And what I would give you the tip to do would be to try and avoid getting bogged down onto price alone, and think about how else do you add value actually. Because it might be that you could change the conversation and start talking about, well, this is my price. Yes, this other person may be, or this other product or person may be cheaper, but look at all these other things I do for you for that price. And then that changes the focus of that discussion. Not necessarily going to work every time, but it's an option. Third tip is about making sure you've got an awareness of both your needs and their needs. And that's about, it's sort of linked into the first question around, first tip around asking questions and listening, but it's really about a willingness to be open and transparent, and so that we get into a really honest conversation. We do the candid stuff around having these negotiations. I think this is, you know, gone are the days, in most cases, and certainly for most of us in the collective, we're not into some hard bargaining situation and where we don't reveal our colours and we're holding back on what our bottom line is. We know that's not really the area that we're in. So actually it's far more effective to be open and transparent about those discussions, so that we get that sort of sense of awareness on both sides. Fourth tip on negotiating prices is just consider maybe adjusting your overall offer. That won't apply in all circumstances by any means, but can you adjust your overall offer? So maybe consider giving a little more of the things that cost you less to offer. So if you have a number of things that you do or that you offer, it might be you can throw in a few extras that mean a lot to the customer because you've asked them, so you know what their priorities are, you know what their needs are. And, you know, you could maybe seem to be very generous, but actually there are things that don't cost you in terms of either time, if you don't want to give the time, or product, or whatever it might be. So it's worth considering that level of adjustment as well. And the fifth tip is, of course, around attitude. Attitude goes a long way, and I know all you lovely people in the collective do this anyway, which is to show that you want your customer to be satisfied. And, you know, if you go in with the right attitude, then they're far more likely to be going along with you, really. If they can, if they're able to, then they're going to want you to succeed. And finally, on negotiating, it's always the best thing to try and find the win-win. I know that's a bit of an overused phrase, but there is a tendency, isn't there, that we think, oh, how dare they, I'm going to dig my heels in now, and it's that price or nothing, or yeah, I'm going to walk away and tell them to get lost or whatever. But it doesn't have to be a power struggle. And I think if they are, you know, reasonable people, there's always the potential for the win-win. So they're the 6 tips for negotiating prices. Hopefully there's something in there for you that has maybe reminded you or triggered a thought that might be appropriate to your business. And now, so if we go on to slow payers, I know not all of you, this won't apply to all of you, but for anyone who has to invoice for your time after you've done it, or for your products after you've delivered them, then this is going to be relevant to you. And there's some sort of generic stuff, I guess, in there as well. So even if you don't, if this is not specifically a problem for you, there may still be something in the tip that you could take away. So first tip is to clearly state your payment terms up front. So on that, you know, are you really clear? Do you have terms and conditions? Do they know when they're booking your services or buying your services what the payment terms are? So that sort of goes without saying, but actually I know quite a lot of people where they don't actually make that as clear as it needs to be. So that would save a lot of problems later on if they end up taking a lot of time to pay. And then the next one is around choosing your words carefully. And obviously that ties into the Savvy Conversations model, but actually this is a little bit more contractual, I suppose. And one of the tips I heard recently around invoicing was instead of saying payment is due by such and such a date, which most invoices I think probably use that kind of terminology. Sorry, the other way around. So payment due by such and such a date is better than saying payment due on receipt. So a lot of people, if they want a quick payment, they want an immediate payment, then they'll say it's due on receipt. So I had a bit of work done actually in the house recently, and that was the invoice that that the tradesperson sent to me, was payment due on receipt. And of course what that does is that gives you time to put it down and put it on your to-do pile, and maybe you forget to come back to it. So payment due by a certain date is actually a bit of a better tip. And then third tip is about consider offering a small discount for early payment. And some of you won't like this idea at all, and that's absolutely fine. If it doesn't fit with your business model, then don't just ignore it. But actually, there's two ways to look at this. One is, do you try and give a penalty if people don't pay on time, or do you offer a small discount for paying early? And actually, it seems that the best advice is that offering a small discount for early payment is more effective than trying to offer a penalty for late payment. So if you do a penalty for late payment at the moment, you might want to think about rephrasing that and putting that round in a different way. And you could do that obviously without losing out. The fourth tip is about making your payment methods convenient. So whatever hassle factor there is that might stop people paying, the best thing you can do is, if it's about offering them payment online, however you think, PayPal, whatever, just to make it as easy as possible for people to pay you without having to go to any trouble whatsoever. So there's no excuses, basically. Fifth one is, and again, I've personally fallen foul of this, I think, a number of times over the years, and that is to chase any late payments sooner rather than later. We don't like to do it, do we? So again, coming back to the creds, we think, if we start chasing it the minute it's overdue, they're going to think we're hassling them. They're going to get annoyed with us. They're going to think we're, vultures, whatever. And so we don't chase until, say, 2 weeks after it was due. Well, then you've lost another 2 weeks. And certainly in my situation with my invoices, I've found that sometimes that's happened. I've waited, not chased the payment up when it's been late. When I have eventually chased it up, I find that it was never received in the first place, or so they say. But to take that on face value, that sometimes things go missing and they didn't arrive in the inbox or whatever it is, lost in the post. So what I certainly do now is, as soon as the deadline that you've given, so payment due by whatever date, as soon as that date's gone by, is to then chase that payment very politely, very professionally, but to just send a first gentle reminder that that payment is now overdue. And actually I find that works really well without upsetting anybody at all. They kind of expect it. So yeah, don't wait to chase your payments. And of course, finally, is about communicating calmly. Make sure that you maintain those good relationships, and make sure people keep coming back to you. So make sure that if you are angry about it, if you are upset about it, that that's not coming across in how you're communicating, whether that's communicating by email, as we talked about earlier, or face to face. So that's the savvy tips for slow payers, which hopefully is useful to you. And then the last one, before we move on to the last one, actually I just put something in here about bad customers before we go into firing those bad customers. And I just wanted to remind us really, and you'll be really well aware of this, I know, but challenging customers aren't necessarily bad customers. And I did a bit of thinking about that when I was putting the slides together for today, because actually, yeah, sometimes a challenging customer can be really helpful to you, can't they? They can maybe be suggesting improvements to the product. They can be suggesting a better service that you could be giving, or different service, new product, whatever it might be. So actually those customers that give you sometimes challenging feedback, as long as it's done in the right way, they hopefully follow the CREDS model, and so do you in how you respond to it, then actually that's a really good, a good thing. So they're not bad customers. These are the bad customers. So hopefully you haven't got any of those, but just, you might want to just take a little tick down the list. Have you got any customers that make unreasonable demands of you? Hopefully not too many. Have you got rude and abrasive customers? You may have customers that are constantly sort of pestering you for discounts all the time. And this is a tricky one these days, isn't it? Those customers that threaten to give you a bad review if they don't get their own way, that you don't do what you say you're going to do. So the kind of TripAdvisors and the all of those kind of things that now we've got at our disposal as customers is really good, but actually some people use those in the wrong way. Just those customers where, you know, they email you and you can't even bear to look at the email, it makes your heart sink, or their phone number comes up on your phone and you think, oh no, not them. Hopefully we haven't got many of those, but those, just basically those customers that take all your time and energy for very little return, and of course the ones that we've mentioned before that never pay on time or in full. So all of these customers take you away from making your good customers happy. So it's really worth thinking, and I know it's really difficult, and most of us are kind of running single operator, we're running one-man bands, one-woman bands, or small businesses, and actually we're really worried about losing our customers. Of course we are, but what we tend to do is think every customer is a good customer because they're a paying customer. And actually what I suppose I'm just posing to us is to say, actually, bad customers are toxic to your business because they are keeping you away from giving good service to your good customers and making your good customers happy. So sometimes, even though you will have done all of these things and had all of these good conversations with people and tried to maintain relationships and tried to you get the results you want, turn them into better customers, sometimes that's just not going to happen. So sometimes we want to fire them or bin them off, as we might say these days. Yeah, because happy customers are the ones that are loyal. They'll be the ones that spend the money with you. They cause you less overheads, and they're the ones that you want. I looked at the statistics on there. I can't remember on how recent this was, but so they say that a happy customer will tell 9 people about their experience of you. So that's 9 bits of free advertising, marketing for your business. So you really do want them. And they're 14 times more likely to buy from you than a new customer. So we put all this effort into getting new customers all the time, but actually if we're to look after our existing customers and make them really, really happy, then they're 14 times more likely to continue to buy from you. So it's these people that we want to keep. So let's just talk about how, if you've got a bad customer, how you might fire them. I have actually done this quite recently with a couple of people, and I was talking to somebody the other day, actually at Room 2, about this too. So the first thing is to state the situation as not being their fault. That's really quite a difficult place to start. But if you say that the situation isn't their fault, but it's about your inability to meet their needs, right? That might grate on you a bit. But actually, that's a good place to start. It takes the wind out of people's sails. It stops them being aggressive towards you. It stops them not liking so much what you're saying. So if you can kind of say, well, look, it's a bit like that classic. It's not you, it's me. And then what we want to do is we want to share the facts with them. We want to make sure that we're being empathetic, so it doesn't look as though we're attacking them. So we're not going to obviously use that language of we need to fire you, you're a bad customer. You still want to really show that you appreciate them, and this is where we start coming back to our seesaw again, don't we? So we want them to get the message across, but at the same time we want to make sure that actually they're still okay about that, really.
Oh, sorry, go for it.
Thanks. Obviously, stay calm and professional. We need to make sure that we don't want to get upset and angry about the situation. It's not an easy situation to be in. I actually agree with this piece of advice which somebody gave me, which was actually sometimes if you just make an apology, even if you haven't necessarily got anything to apologise for, that can diffuse the anger. If they're showing anger on their side. Now, I recognise, I know, do a lot of work around assertiveness training, and I know that the purest assertiveness trainers would say you don't apologise. But actually, I think, for me, I see the bigger picture, and I think the bigger picture is it's better to actually apologise if it's appropriate to do so, and then that can just diffuse the anger. Maybe think about softening the blow. You might not want to do this, but particularly if they've been with you a long time, soften the blow by considering a refund or giving them some kind of gesture of goodwill. Depends what the circumstances is, doesn't it, around why you're firing them. But that might make them go away a bit happier, and it might ease your conscience if you need to do that. So maybe to have a think about that. Actually, this made me laugh when I saw this, because it's around suggesting an alternative for them. So I can't help you, but so and so might be able to, even if that's a competitor. Well, you might definitely want to send them a competitor. Oh, that's me being mean. I don't mean that. Yeah. So suggest an alternative. Give them another way out rather than leaving them stuck. And the thing is, having said all of that, ideally you still want to save the relationship. I know you probably don't like them much at that time, but despite everything else, you still want to try and end on a good note, because they may come back to you again in the future in different circumstances. They may tell other people about how well you handled the situation, or of course they might do the opposite. So we still want to try and end on a good note if we can, even when we're saying we're not going to be working with you again. Good. Okay, so that's firing bad customers. So let's bring that back to a little bit more positive rather than ending on that. So if I just remind you about the triangle: right conversation in the right way at the right time. And if you think about all of those things that we've talked through, negotiating the price, the slow payers, the firing bad customers, whatever it is around talking about money, and keeping that balance between getting the results and maintaining the relationship, then we shouldn't go too far wrong. So I hope I've given you some food for thought there. I don't know if there's any time for questions. I'm looking at Helen now to see whether any questions have come through.
So Abby has asked, hi Abby.
Hi Abby.
When talking about money, is it okay to laugh about the fact it's an awkward subject before you chat about it?
Oh, that's a really good question. Really good question. So I think those of you that know me would probably know I would say yes to that, actually. I think it does depend, doesn't it? It depends on what the situation is and how serious it's got. But a bit of humility, a bit of fun. You've got, you take the issue seriously, but you don't have to take yourself too seriously. So I'd say yes. I think you can, as long as you don't dilute your message. So if we go back to the 5 cogs, if by laughing about it as an issue, what's that doing? If we think about that, what's that doing? That is helping with the maintain relationship side of things, because it's helping people kind of see you on a personable basis and it's looking after the relationship. As long as you then don't lose sight of the clear message that you then got to give, then that's a really good tactic, I think, to keep that balance going.
Okay. Another question that I've just thought of would you say it's always better to talk about money face to face? Because I always obviously get asked via email. I always get email inquiries. Should I try and meet with them and discuss money at a later date? Because quite often it's people's first question. What are your costs? And I find that really hard because they haven't even met me. They don't know me. So what would you say? I should try and call them rather than...
That's a really good one, actually, and I think it's really difficult. And the reason I'm hesitating is I think perhaps my immediate advice would be one thing, and then I was thinking through what would I do, and then I think, I would probably tend to go with the email sometimes. So I've got to be honest about that. I think sometimes it's easier to initially raise the issue by email, but if it's coming from the other way round. If we think about it, it's the customer asking the question about price and they don't yet know enough about you and your service, then I would think it's a much better idea to try and meet with them first and suggest that you have a chat about making sure you understand their requirements, making sure that they understand what it is you can offer, and to do that first, really, before you start negotiating on price. Yeah. Okay. Otherwise you get into the price and then they sort of go away before you've had that opportunity to get to know you.
Just before I ask another one, if anyone does have a question, if they put it in on the chat, I can see it from my end. So if you do have a question, Dee, Ian, Abby, then please do ask. My other question, sorry, it's going to be all my questions.
That's all right.
Would you say your pricing should be quite obvious from the offset? So I always have lots of conversations with other photographers about pricing being on our websites. Would you say that we should give people an indication of what our price is?
So good question. I think that's really difficult, actually, because obviously you need to consider commercial, your commerciality, don't you? Is that a word? You might not want to be that open with your pricing because you might not want everyone, all your competitors, to know what you're charging. The way I've dealt with this is probably the best way I can answer it. Is I don't put if it's a really clear, defined product, then I'd go with put the pricing on the website. So if it's a really, really straightforward, it's the same for everybody, it's the same amount of time.
So for example, so we've got a lot of members who are in the health and fitness industry. So a PT, for example, would you say they can say, my personal training is such and such for an hour?
I would, actually.
Yeah.
I would. But to then obviously say what they, what the credentials of why you're worth that much per hour. So I think where it's a service like that, which people kind of know they can go and compare like with like really easily, then it's a really good idea to put the price up front. If it's more nuanced than that, and it depends what they ask for and it depends what they want, and it's all a bit more dependent on your conversation and your knowledge of their needs, then I would say you don't do that.
Right. And
that you try and stay away from, again, the negotiating on price before they get to know you. Yeah. I think that's probably the best way.
No, that's great. Abby's just come in with another question as well. What do you do when someone is looking to offer something other than cash as a payment?
Oh, did she give an example?
Give an example now.
So, I'm trying to think what you might mean. So,
I guess, okay, so I can relate this to myself. Yeah. I often get people asking to swap their service for what I do, like freebies, and obviously there's only so many freebies you can get, and sometimes you're like, you don't want to be rude by saying, actually, I don't want what you're offering.
It's really tough. I think that's really hard, actually. I think if there's I know quite a lot of people, certainly locally, who've done that and they've been really happy with it. So there's nothing, I don't think there's anything wrong with it at all, but I would bring you back to the creds. And it's about really being clear with yourself, and then you'll be clear with your the person that you're talking to around, do you really value it's really tough, but do you really value their service that they're offering, or their product that they're offering in return for what you're doing? Yeah. And I think you really have got to have an honest conversation about that.
Yeah.
Because it may be you could work out a slightly different way. So it might be, well, as I'll do one of those for you if you do two of those for me. And I know that's a bit tricky, but that could be the value. Or you just straightforwardly say, I just haven't got the space to do that right now. I'd keep it cleaner. You charge me for that product and I will charge you for that.
Yeah.
But I guess it depends how close you are in value.
Yeah. Ian has just commented on the last question we asked about pricing on the website, and he has said, when offering a customer service, I wouldn't publish prices on the website. You want to talk with them as it gives the opportunity to discover their needs, their budget, etc. If you are VAT registered, he just said you must charge VAT on the value of the exchange service.
Oh, that's a really good point, actually. I think there's a lot of people not doing that, Ian, but I think that's really interesting that you raised that, actually. Because there's no money changing hands.
Yeah.
So I think that's where people I'm sure the people that I have got in my mind who I know have done that, they wouldn't have even given that a thought about the VAT. So it's a really good point that you raised.
I did write down something earlier. Anyone else got any questions, by the way? Please feel free to say. When you're discussing money, are there any sort of sentences, any use of language, any sort of body language tips that you would say to bear in mind when broaching the subject of money or when answering a question about money?
Gosh. Well, I suppose first of all, bear that fact in mind that 55% of your feelings and your attitude comes across in your body language. So I think for me the most important thing is to make sure that your body language is in tune with the message that you're giving. So what's worse is if you obviously give in mixed messages. So if on the one hand you're having a really serious conversation about money, but you're kind of being really casual about it and laughing and joking, coming back to Abby's point really, then that's going to seem inauthentic.
Yeah.
And you're going to come across in the wrong way. So I think it is worth bearing that in mind. Having said that, I think there's a lot that you can get over in terms of being authentic, genuinely wanting a solution, genuinely wanting to maintain a good relationship with people, even though you're discussing a difficult subject. For me, tactics-wise, I would tend to start with something along the lines of, I know nobody likes to talk about money, or this. I don't necessarily feel comfortable having this discussion. If that's how you feel, why not say so? Yes. I don't necessarily feel comfortable about this, but this is a conversation I feel we need to have.
Yeah.
Then you're being, you're showing your humility, your vulnerability, but not in a way that you're giving away your power. Yeah. I think it's different.
Yeah.
It's a different thing. And again, this is why the seesaw is so important. Because the acknowledging that it's a difficult conversation up front shows your human side and shows that you mean well, so it makes it safer for them to have an honest conversation with you. Whereas if you kind of go in very stern and, well, this is serious, so therefore I want to be definitely serious about it, then actually they can react to that in a less human way.
I guess it's about gauging the person you're talking to, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And remember that we mirror our other people's body language and other people's tone of voice and behaviour. So if you are met with a fierceness, you're likely, always, it's not guaranteed, but you're likely to get a fierceness back. If you're met with stern, you're going to likely get stern back. So, try and approach it in a way that you would like them to respond to you, and then you're more likely to get that mirrored back to you.
Okay. I did have something put on my mind there, but one of the things I always have to do, or I feel I should have to do, because I often get people coming back to me, because obviously there's lots of wedding photographers out there. I always get people going, well, okay, we probably won't go with you because I've been offered the price of someone's offered me a wedding photography for £500 cheaper. Yeah. Why should we go with you? And then I feel I go on the defensive a little bit, because it's like I feel like I'm having to justify my price.
Yeah.
And I find it very hard to do that in a way that's still, because then you're really selling, and I'm not, it's the selling thing is a hard thing. Are there any sort of tips for if someone comes back with, well, this person's so-and-so is only this price?
Yeah, see, I would probably, my tip would just be don't get into that. And I know that sounds really easy to say, but I think it's, you then back to that thing is you end up, what you're doing is you're having the whole conversation around pricing, your pricing compared to their pricing.
Yeah.
And you're not talking about your value compared to their value.
Yeah.
So you need to switch the conversation, don't you? And you need, and it's much better to say, well, okay, I understand that. Why don't we have a chat about what's most important to you? And maybe you need to go with that other.
Yeah.
If you think they're going to give you 100% of what you want for that fee, then you should go with them.
Yeah. To be honest, that is the tact I normally take, because I kind of think I don't want to get into that to and fro over. Well, I offer an album, and they don't really, you know, it's
no.
As you say, it's all about the value.
It's asking them to think about the value, though, rather than you having to defend your value.
Yeah.
I think that's the difference, isn't it?
Ian's just said, I think, good point, Sarah. Many of us feel uncomfortable, but it gets easier to talk about money the more you do it. And then he said, when giving the price in the first place, list all of the value you provide for that fee.
Yeah, definitely. And certainly something that I learned a long time ago. I used to do a lot more bigger kind of tender documents and things like that. I don't tend to do that anymore. But always put the value up front. Totally agree with Ian on that. You know, even in a document, I would always put the value up front and then say, and all of that is going to cost you this.
Yeah.
So you don't start with the price, you give them the service first.
Yeah. That's a good point, actually, and that's something that I don't do. I give the price first.
Good.
So,
price last, definitely.
price last.
Yeah.
I did think of something else. I often have it that people inquire with me. Sorry, this is turned into the Helen Talk Free.
Helen's having a one-to-one coaching session on pricing.
But hopefully this will be true to most people who are out there. But I often have people approach me, say, can we meet you, or say, can we have a phone call with you or Skype, and I get into it and I find I've been with them for like an hour and a half, and you're sort of trying to ask questions, and I'm trying to just be really interested in their day and what they do and what they want from me and get to know their needs a little bit more. And it just feels like, and we sort of, you just really want to wrap up that conversation because you've just been chatting for ages, and actually you're wasting a lot of your own time and you don't even know if you've got the job yet.
Absolutely.
At what point would you say the money issue should be raised?
Yeah, I mean, that's again, so come back to the 5 cogs. That is the direction cog, isn't it? So if you need to make sure that you're moving it on, you need to make sure that you're having that conversation about money, and that also you're wrapping it up and saying, well, we've had a good chat now. Maybe it is we've had a good chat now, shall we move on to, do you want me to share information about pricing, or do you want me to send that to you separately? And maybe just gently kind of go down that, ease them into it, but don't be frightened of raising that, definitely.
Or would you say just sort of end, sort of bring the conversation to a close with, do you have any more questions for me at this point?
I'd be a bit more directional.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's your potentially your directional cog is a bit small.
Yeah.
So I would raise that up a bit and be clearer, because they may want your lead on that actually. Okay. So it'd be better to go a little bit higher volume on the directional and say, well, okay, so I've shared all of this with you. Is there anything else you need from me to be able to make a decision? And what information do you want from me on pricing? So that you're ready to make a decision as soon as you've considered it.
Yeah, well, that's very true. Because I always shy away from the talking about money on the phone or in person, and I normally think, yes, they haven't mentioned it, I can get away with that. But actually, if they've got any issues with my pricing or any queries, it's better that then they're able to raise them
to do it there and then. And if you have had the not necessarily on the phone, I don't think if that's your first port of call is the phone and they haven't asked you about it and they're offering to meet, then I think it's a tactic for when you meet.
Okay.
Because I think then face to face, then by the time they've committed to meeting you face to face, they're interested.
Yeah.
And then also you'll get your body language across, they'll meet you and get to know the vibe.
Yeah. Well, they've given a lot of their time, haven't they? So yeah.
Okay. But I definitely wouldn't leave it until afterwards and think, oh, that's good, the price isn't an issue because they didn't raise it, because you will probably end up wasting your time, won't you?
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Well, I don't have any more questions. And Ian has said, similar experience, I was a bid manager once.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, we'll have to compare notes then, Ian, I think.
And Abby's only just figured out how to chat on here. So I'm just going to see if on here Abby has any other. No, Abby doesn't have any other questions. So
that's good. So,
do you have any final wrap-up points or?
No, obviously, if there's anything else that anyone wants to chat about, I'm more than happy to have a chat about it. I don't think this is a straightforward issue, by the way, at all. I'm sure I haven't given anyone any definitive answers, but what I would say is every situation is different. You're all offering different services, you're all offering different products, and your customers are always all different. So you have to have. That's why I think that the model to help you adapt to each and every one of those situations is the way forward, rather than having a standard approach that will fit all.
Yeah. One thing to say is that if you do have any follow-up questions to this,
let me get Helen in.
If you do have any follow-up questions to this, Sarah is very kindly going to be at our July 1-year anniversary mingle.
Oh, yes.
And she's going to be one of the people doing the speed dating session with you alongside Ian and alongside Lucy from the Dainty Desk. So if you did think of anything and you wanted to just maybe have more of a one-to-one with Sarah on this subject, then please feel free to bring it up with her there.
Fabulous. All right, hope it was useful, everybody. Thanks for joining at this late hour, and see you all soon.
See you soon. Bye.